The leaders of the two most powerful nations on Earth are preparing to meet today in Washington, D.C. Chinese President Hu Jintao arrived Tuesday. He's beginning his state visit to the United States. He was greeted at Andrews Air Force Base by Vice President Joe Biden. Today, President Obama will welcome President Hu to the White House for talks on currency, trade, and national security. Jamie Metzl, Executive Vice President of the Asia Society, is on the show this morning. Jamie, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And before President Hu leaves this country, what is the one goal that President Obama wants to accomplish?
Jobs, jobs, jobs.
How does he do it?
President Obama needs to make the case that if we have fair trade with China, it's going to be good for China, and more importantly, it's going to be good for the United States. And what that means is we need Chinese investment here. We need a level playing field for U.S. investors who are investing and corporations that are trying to work in China. We need to make sure that China is respecting America's intellectual property rights, which have been massively violated in China. And of course, everyone's talking about the currency issue. As long as China's currency is so hugely undervalued, it's going to be very, very difficult for many countries, partly the United States, but even more developing countries, to compete. And that creates a lot of imbalances in the global economy.
The economy, the big issue. Do you think this trip will change that?
I think it will begin to change that. China is recognizing that America is getting its act together. When President Obama visited China in 2009, the trip was really a disaster. Last year, I was in Seoul when President Obama was there for the G20. America looked very disorganized. This trip is different. We've seen three cabinet secretaries, Gates, Geithner, and Clinton, giving major speeches over the last week or so about U.S.-China relations. There's a choreography. We're clearly stating what we expect from China, which is progress on economic issues, progress on nuclear proliferation issues, North Korea, Iran, and for China to play a much more constructive role in global affairs.
We're talking about the economy. How do you make a deal with someone that you owe money to? You know, it sounds like a euphemism.
Yeah, how do
It's somewhat true. The U.S. right now, or at least China, holds the largest portion of U.S. debt. We're talking about $895 billion. Does the U.S. have the leverage to make demands?
Well, you can pick your metaphor. You know, how do you pressure your banker? How does a dealer, how does a drug user deal with their dealer? Whatever the thing is, the United States, we have become addicted to this cheap credit that we are getting from China. We're living far beyond our means. We're accruing this debt, and we are slowly beginning to sink under the weight. We still have enormous leverage over China. China is still, relatively speaking, a small holder of American debt. But if we have this level of debt, it's going to be very dangerous for us in the future. And if we don't make the tough decisions for ourselves, the bond market is going to make it for us, and that's going to be much, much more difficult.
Tone of the talks, what do you think? Cordial, conciliatory? Are they going to be debating? What are we going to see?
It's going to be more cordial, especially in the public pronouncements. But behind the scenes, there are some very difficult conversations that have to happen. And it's very important that these conversations happen because the relationship between the United States and China, there are a lot of conflicts. There are differences of perspective. And we're going to have the kind of relationship where we can speak openly and honestly. And we're going to need to see much greater reciprocity than we've seen in the past.
Let's talk about this state dinner. Apparently much bigger than a local buffet or anything that you and I would enjoy.
I'm going for lunch there tomorrow.
Really? Well, actually, you know, I want to talk about that. So you are going to D.C.
Yes.
What are you going to be doing?
I'm going to be having lunch at the State Department. There's a lunch for President Hu hosted by Secretary Clinton and Vice President Biden.
And you will be in the room?
I will be in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this state dinner that's coming up, this is a big
Much
deal.
bigger deal.
Right, much bigger deal. Will this help?
It always helps. I mean, this is a big deal. Last time President Hu was in the United States, he didn't get a state dinner. This was seen by the Chinese as a slight. This time, it's very important for China to get the kind of legitimation that a state dinner represents. Chinese people and Chinese culture, these kinds of symbols are very, very important. It's one of the reasons why President Obama's 2009 visit to China was such a, in many eyes, perhaps even my own, a disaster, because we got all of the images were harmful to the United States and harmful to President Obama. So it's very carefully choreographed, and what we're going to be showing is that we respect you, we respect your differences, but there are real issues and we need to address them.
Before President Hu even arrived, there were protesters, and we've seen this issue before, demonstrators on China's human rights record. Is this an issue that will come up again?
Yeah, it is. And it should. The United States has been a champion of global human rights, not just because we're nice guys, but because it's been our history and it's our reading of world history that in a world where individual rights are protected is a much safer world. We all saw what happened both here in the United States and around the world when that wasn't the case. So when we're talking about human rights issues in China, when we're talking about China's responsibility to be a much stronger advocate for human rights issues in places like Burma, like North Korea, like Sudan, like Zimbabwe, it's not just about being nice, it's about building the kind of safe and secure world that can be best for everybody.
So Jamie, as we go forward here, how should we view China? Is China a friend? Is China the enemy? Are they a rebel? And should we be worried about their growing influence in the world?
China's growing influence is a fact. We should in some ways see China as a friend. We should in some ways see China as a competitor. And we need to hedge our bets. I mean, if it would be great if the United States and China were able to come together and really work collaboratively to tackle the biggest challenges that the world faces, whether in environmental issues and greenhouse gas emissions or human rights. I mean, you could have a long list of issues. But there are other areas where there are growing tensions. China is claiming a greater swath of the South and East China Sea as its core interest, its national territory. The United States has been a guarantor of the open navigation of the seas. China is using its muscle in places like Africa and Latin America much more than they've done in the past. They are in many ways undermining some of the Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank and the IMF that the United States helped create. And so if there are areas where we can compete, where we can collaborate, we need to find them, we need to nurture those. But when there are differences, we need to say, look, this is the kind of world that we've been working to build over the last 6 or 7 decades. We think, warts and all, it's a pretty good world. If you want to be part of it, you need to step up and say, here's what we, China, are willing to do, and then let's have that conversation.
Jamie Metzl on the show this morning, and you'll be getting a front row seat on some of the action tomorrow in D.C. Come back and tell us about it.
Thanks so much.
Jamie Metzl, thank you.